Hello there, Steve here in Sydney. I'm just going to talk a little bit about evolution and reveal something to you that you may not know. I first encountered evolution a long time ago when it was rammed in my face by people preaching it on the internet with religious fervour. I'm actually a Gnosis teacher, that's Gnosis with a G, which is a way of awakening the divine spark in each person and encouraging the divine spark to reveal itself to you in your daily life. But I was soon found I was buried in this swarm of pseudo-skeptics, these people who practice selective hyper-skepticism, grave dishonesty, profound dishonesty, great dishonesty, and preach evolution as a religion. It seems to come out of the Bible Belt of America, which contains about 65 million Christians who believe the Bible is literally the Word of God and should be literally obeyed. Pseudo-skeptics seem to be a casualty of that system of enforced literalism, where you're supposed to take holy books literally when in fact they're obviously meant to be taken metaphorically. Now, so I met this swarm of people all over the internet that make the internet experience so unpleasant, these pseudo-skeptics. They have ringleaders in the public domain and they have seemingly hundreds of thousands of them all over the internet playing this game of pseudo-skepticism. Now I'm going to tell you something about the religion that you preach so much, this materialist 19th century dogma that you think Charles Darwinism invented, which he didn't really at all. If you open the book Origin of the Species, you'll see that it's written entirely by Charles Darwin. According to him, he writes his name in there and he's the sole author of it all. But in practice, he was only the co-inventor, and Charles Darwin got a lot of his ideas from a British scientist who spent much of his time in the Amazon jungles and the rainforests of Malaya. And in fact, survival of the fittest and the phrase natural selection actually came from this British scientist in Malaya that you don't know much about, called Alfred Wallace. Now, voluminous, this is proven by voluminous letters between the men, and Alfred Wallace was a major contributor to the theory of evolution. This may surprise you that Charles Darwin didn't make it all up himself. I mean, for example, Charles Darwin's own grandfather published a book on Origin of the Species. Grandfather! Before 1859, his grandfather published something about Origin of the Species and survival of the fittest. Can you believe that? So, Charles Darwin may not be the demigod hero, sole inventor of the theory of evolution. So think about that. And we might also bear in mind that Charles Darwin trained for the priesthood. And on the Beagle, the ship that he went on, there were daily religious services and hymn singing. So do think about the atmosphere in which the so-called science of evolution was invented. Origin of the Species was received with acclaim around the world, and in fact the first printing sold out in an amazing 24 hours. Can you imagine that? And it quickly spread the idea that Charles Darwin was the sole inventor of this idea set. This idea is survival of the fittest and slow changes can produce anything just given enough time, etc. But that's not actually what Darwin did say. That's the modern interpretation of what he wrote in 1859. Now, what happened to Mr. Wallace, Alfred Wallace, an Englishman from Wales actually? What did actually happen to him? Alfred Wallace continued to support Charles Darwin for the rest of his natural life into the early 1900s and praised Darwin for what he was doing, educating society, enlightening society as to the physical relationships between things in nature, the ecology of life, which Wallace had become an expert on in the jungles of the Amazon and Malaya. Now, one of the things that Alfred Wallace noticed was that we do a hell of a lot of things that we don't really have to do for our survival, such as art, music, ballet, religion, philosophy, mathematics, a whole bunch of things that just aren't necessary for survival. So he began to wonder, what are we all here for? And he was also cognizant of the obvious thing that You don't need consciousness at all. You could really ensure survival just by reflexes alone. You don't seem to need consciousness. It seems to be a sort of add-on or something that isn't needed if we are just upright apes doing clever things, catching trains, etc. So Alfred Wallace, supporting Charles Darwin absolutely 100% of the way about the physical relationships of animals and plants and geography and geology, and never batted an eye about exploring consciousness and awareness and why we seem to have a bigger dose of consciousness than we really need. And his curiosity took him out of the forests of Malaya and the Amazon. His curiosity took him into the realm of consciousness. In fact, he began to study mediums, you see. And something happened to this scientist, who was a very noted naturalist, a very skilled observer, and a very deep and profound thinker, and very capable of the overall perspective and getting things in the right relativity to that. Now, the society at the time was Victorian society, and they were so proud of, they were beating their chests about how they led the world, the British Industrial Revolution, etc. The scientific world was making all these breakthroughs, and they did believe, and this was the attitude of the 19th century, that a little bit more refinement of materialism, that's cutting a few things up into smaller and smaller pieces, by the end of the century we'll know everything the materialist scientists said. That was the intelligentsia's attitude of the time in Victorian times. This was during the time of gas lamps and steam engines, okay? So, against this backdrop, where everything was thought to be material, and that's certainly the idea pushed by science, Alfred Wallace began publishing his successful communications with the dead, verified by medium after medium, verified by him, one of the leading scientists of the day. So what do you think happened to Alfred Wallace? The materialist intelligentsia deleted him from history, ridiculed him from pillar to post. He was slandered by everyone who thought he was a scientist in those days. And what was the crime of Alfred Wallace? Well, I'm going to use a little joke here I got from a skeptic. Alfred Wallace had quassed the woo beacon. He'd moved from materialism into the land of woo, the frightening thing that upsets and distresses pseudo-skeptical people who want the world to be simple and materialistic. Crossing the Rubicon is a metaphor for the pseudo-skeptics who don't know what metaphors are. They're figures of speech, right? So there, Alfred Wallace, previously the darling of the scientific world, co-inventor of Darwinism with Darwin, and he praised Darwin for the rest of his life no matter what the society did to him. He went off into exploring consciousness and mediums and that sort of thing for the rest of his life, and he was marginalised, sidelined, and basically deleted from the pages of history. Now, if you read some of his writings, you'll discover that he had to contend with pseudo-skeptics way back in the 1860s and 1870s. And he was simply a man ahead of his time, one of the best scientists of his day, with Charles Darwin. And he got slammed, kicked out of the theatre, kicked out of the game of science because he dared to introduce something that seemed to threaten the fundamentals of science as they knew it at the time. That's physicality, materialism. Now, this is in a Michael Tim book. It's one chapter devoted to Alfred Wallace, and there are a number of other leading scientists who had their careers either destroyed or greatly diminished by daring to investigate the land of woo, which is the thing that frightens all the pseudo-skeptics. And there's so many of them, it may surprise you how many great scientists turn out to be pseudo-skeptics, unable to learn past a certain point. And it seems to be materialism. They think if you go beyond material substance that you're going to fall off a cliff into nothingness, and that mystery seems to scare a lot of people. And so you got this remark by Max Planck that science advances one funeral at a time. That's what he was referring to. You have to wait for these old pseudo-skeptics to die for science to progress. But this has been going on 100 years, this denialism of the non-material world, which is consciousness. So I'll put here beside this talking head a panel with the details of the book, Michael Timm's book. It's only $4 is the download. $4 is a Kindle book. The Kindle reader works in your IBM PC, and you get the book for $4, and one chapter is devoted to Alfred Wallace. It's a damned good read, an exciting read about how asleep humanity is, and how a few people get swatted off the stage if they dare to say anything that's a little bit threatening to some of the population. A surprising thing is that this pseudo-skeptic phenomenon has been going on for about 100 years, and these pseudo-skeptics say even if the evidence is 1,000 times stronger, they still won't believe in this land of woo thing that as soon as you step off materialism, you're into the land of woo, which scares them. So they are fear-based thinkers, and it limits their ability to follow an evidence trail. Whereas people like Sir Oliver Lodge and Alfred Wallace just bravely carried on it without even noticing that they were seriously studying material things. In the same book, the Michael Timm book that I've got here on the side panel, you'll find a wonderful description of what Sir Oliver Lodge did, who was a great physicist who was still talking about physics by 1920. He did some wonderful, what can I say, certifications that mediums were genuine. It's a wonderfully cheap book, $4, and you get all this information. Its history retrieved by the miracle of the internet, modern electronic age, brings 19th century books and skilled summary people like Michael Timm, who does a summary of 19th century materialist responses to mediums and evidence for the afterlife. He's putting out a 4-volume series of books. Volume 1 is available for only $4. It's a damn good read. And it shows you that some people haven't learned in 100 years, that they don't study history, they don't know, they don't want to know, and they don't want the world to be big and expansive and exciting. They want it to be dull, boring and predictable, entirely predictable. So that's pseudo-skeptics for you, but they dog. And Alfred Wallace, I'll make a video about some of the things said by Alfred Wallace, and you'll see pseudo-skeptics starring in his writings. I'll be doing that for you. I might even connect it to this. It'll give you some idea. But I do recommend Michael Timm's book to you, detailing a number of great scientists of the 19th century who verified the certainty, the certitude, the veracity, the genuineness, the reality of afterlife and the activities of mediums, which were suddenly commenced in about 1847 in this book Michael Timm describes. So there'll be links below this video, okay, to go to that, okay? And I'll finish here now.